This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A cattle market update with Katelyn McCullock, Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, begins today's show. She discusses current market conditions, as well as a part of it that is growing fast this year. Keeping the show rolling is Jayson Prentice with the Kansas Bureau of Air, as he explains a recent study he contributed to that looked into smoke emissions from prescribed burning in the Flint Hills. Joe Parcell, Director of the Center for Risk Management at K-State, finishes today's show with a preview of the upcoming Agricultural Commodities Futures Conference. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update. And this week we're joined by Director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock. Katelyn, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me today, Shelby.
Katelyn, what are we seeing on the cash side of things for the cattle market?
Well, fed cattle prices have come back up in the daily 5-area average after they kind of weakened to this 170 level. We're back up at 189 last week. So a better strong price heading into the second quarter. Seasonally, we would have expected it to strengthen a little bit heading into that second quarter, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get back above 190 here in the near future. On the feeder cattle side, Kansas market, Dodge City, we were looking at basically a 254 price for 7 to 8 weeks. That price has been relatively sticky around that 250 level. For 5 to 6s, we've seen a little bit more action, I would say, and it's risen for steers all the way up to 338 2 weeks ago. Came a little bit down last week at 317, but still holding a very strong over $300 a hundredweight price on the cash side. On the futures side, live cattle futures have kind of bounced around. They haven't shown as much optimism maybe as the cash price has built in there. They were down on Friday over $1 across probably over $1.50 for most contracts, and hovering in the mid 180s essentially throughout most of 2024, and not really seeing anything over 190 until 2025. The feeder cattle futures, they had a terrible day on last Friday, and some of the contracts stretching below, dropping almost $4 a hundredweight. They're looking at about a 250 price, give or take a few across the March through May contracts, up over 260 in August through October. We are thinking this market is going to hold together fairly well, and there's just a little bit of volatility there in that futures trade. We are expecting fourth quarter to be the highest price point for fed cattle and probably calves for sure. But how it comes together for the feeders, it's going to be a little bit more influenced maybe with what's going on with grass throughout the year. We've talked a little bit about La Nina coming back into the picture and how big of an impact that has, as well as what the overall feed costs do. So if we look at what cattle feeding margins have done so far this year, they've been negative, and all of that is going to influence kind of how those 7 to 8 weeks prices behave.
And Katelyn, also wanting to look at the prices for box beef cutout.
So box beef has held over $3 a pound, and over the last couple of days, or at least most of last week, it was right around 313. Very, very stable kind of week. But we've seen this price continue to increase roughly since the first of the year. One of the more interesting things that we've been watching, box beef is interesting too, but we've been really looking at this cow box beef value. Now, box beef is an aggregate term. It's a weighted average of what the carcass is to try and describe what the value of that carcass is for a fed animal. The cow one is doing something similar, but it's talking about those co-cow values. And so it has more trimmings in it, more lean product in it than you would say for a fed steer. That price is up 25% since the start of the year. It opened the year somewhere around 205 and is now sitting over 250, 100. Comparatively, if you think of where box beef is, it's at 313. That spread ebbs and flows a little bit depending on what's going on in the market. What's supporting that cow number is going to be that we have seen cow slaughter decline quite a bit from where we had been in past years. So the U.S. source of cow beef comes largely from the beef cow herd, and that's down about slaughter's down about 12% so far this year. Now, that cow market impacts the U.S. in a variety of ways. If you think about what kind of products does cow beef go into, it's lean trimmings that then gets ground out into different products, such as burgers, a lot of food service products. You can see that impact in those markets. And the 90% fresh lean trimmings price has been on an absolute tear this year. And it's a start that I don't believe we've ever seen. It's gained pace very, very quickly. It started the year closer to 250, and now it's up to almost 325 in the last week. Very, very fast. The most comparable thing is probably 2014, where it was closer to a 15% rally at this point in the year. And so the question is, especially for food service and anyone looking to buy lean beef ahead, is how high can this price go? Is it better to buy it now, or should we wait and not hopefully be locked into such a high price? I think based on the cattle cycle and what we're forecasting for cow slaughter, this price will continue to climb. In 2014, it reached in total for the year up about 40% when you look at the first of the year to the peak. If we did that here in 2024, compared to its relative start of the year, we'd be looking at something like a 355 price. I don't think that's out of the question by any means, but at some point it probably needs to slow down its gain. But until we kind of have more product or less demand, who knows when that'll happen. The other fascinating piece of this 90% lean product is still gaining ground, even though imports into the U.S. have been tremendously high. They were up 38% in January. And we had a lot of our key importers put up huge percent increases from where they were a year ago. So Australia doubled roughly its imports from January of 2023. Uruguay was up 87%. New Zealand was up 62%. Brazil up 48%. And that's mostly going to be lean beef coming from those specific countries. One key difference, though, is quite a bit of it is actually frozen. So maybe that's why we haven't quite seen the impact on that fresh price. But you might see things at the retail level or at the food service level where they maybe switch products away from fresh because of that price difference that may come into play. You also will probably start to see, especially fast casual, start to change menu prices if these prices continue to climb.
Katelyn, as you've talked about 90, what about for the 50%?
So the 50% lean product is really mostly coming from that fed cattle price, those fed cattle coming through the system. And we get probably less overall trimmings from those types of carcasses, but we really need to blend it with leaner meats to develop products that consumers want to purchase and that restaurants want to use. And so you have this situation where if you don't have enough of either, it can impact the other market. And at this point, it looks like 50s are, by comparison, look weak, but really they're still at $100 a 100 weight type of price, which is well above the 5-year average, which is closer to 80. So we're still seeing a fairly strong price here. It is below a year ago, but that price is gonna probably not take off until we see a little bit fewer cattle on feed and a little bit less marketings coming through the system.
And Katelyn, as we round out today's conversation, this is our last cattle market conversation before Easter. And so have we seen any impacts in the livestock market because of that?
So Easter is a very popular lamb holiday. It's one of the highest demand periods for lamb in the U.S. And so we like to look at the wholesale lamb price, but it's also a very popular ham consumption period as well. Now, lamb wholesale prices have been high for a couple of years, whereas hams, they haven't necessarily seen any substantial rally specifically related to Easter. Hams are generally holding close to a year ago with a little volatility in that market. Now, some of that also is influenced by what trade is doing. And so those prices can impact that. But we haven't seen, a lot of impact directly related to Easter from normal. On the other hand, if you think about what lamb prices are doing, the national lamb cutout price is somewhere around $475. That's about $25 higher than where it was last year. lamb in the ewe herd, or ewe flock, I should say, in the U.S. has been on a decline for several decades at this point. And so the consumption of lamb isn't necessarily very large, but that's what makes these high demand periods kind of a very key time period for this market. And if you look at racks, they're quite a bit below a year ago, but still a very high price, over $150 per hundredweight over the 5-year average. Similar things going on with racks, as well as loin prices, all very, very high relative to the 5-year average. Loins are probably the only ones above last year, and that was one of the few products that was below the 5-year average in 2023. So in other words, we're starting to see more wholesale lamb impacts for Easter, and this is that time of year, whereas some of the Easter impacts directly for hams are more muted just by general consumption patterns, because hams are also used in things like lunch meat, and in some cases, people may be eating ham for Thanksgiving or Christmas or some other holiday occasion. And so that's a little less impactful maybe than what we see in the lamb.
Katelyn, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our cattle market update.
Well, thank you. And as you know, Shelby, this is my last time on your show. And so thank you, and thank all your listeners for tuning in. And I wish you guys nothing but the best. So thank you.
Katelyn, wishing you the best in your next adventure as well. That was the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock. If you'd like to find more information from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, you can do so on their website at LMIC.info. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Monday show discussing research on smoke emissions from prescribed fire. And in to talk about it, we're joined by Data and Sustainability Section Chief with the Kansas Bureau of Air, Jayson Prentice. Jayson, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Jayson, can you tell us a little bit about why this research took place?
So for Kansas, obviously we leverage prescribed fire quite a bit, especially in the Flint Hills region. We're actually known in the nation as being very prominent in leveraging prescribed fire, both for ecological and economic reasons. When we go and look at smoke research, we use a generic grassland emission factor. When we talk about what is in the smoke, what we see for emissions and so on. So it was important that Kansas Department of Health and Environment and Kansas State University teamed up and kind of looked at how we could develop some specific emission factors for the Flint Hills and our grassland burns that we complete, especially here in the springtime.
And you got to use some technology that was at the beginning of being able to use it for prescribed fire research.
Yep, we were able to leverage the Polytechnic campus with K-State over in Salina and actually utilize what they're going to call unmanned aerial systems. Most people prefer to talk to them just as drones, but very, very cool tools that we're able to use. Put instruments, attach them to them, and actually fly them very close to the fire and actually through the smoke plumes, both very close to the flames and then as well as in the distance further downstream with the smoke.
Do you feel like you're able to get more accurate data that way then?
Absolutely. More accurate and more data. In the past, a lot of smoke research was done by just tying an instrument to a pole or a tower somewhere and just getting that instantaneous smoke or flame, as it went by. In this case, using UASs, we're able to actually stay right with that flaming front, or stay in the approximately same area downwind in the smoke to get more results and better results that way.
What different things were you sampling for?
We were looking primarily at air pollutants. So we're looking at particulate matter, which is those smoke particles that you most often think about. We also looked at carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, methane, and then other fun things like what we call VOCs, so volatile organic compounds, and nitrogen dioxide, which are both components into creating ozone, which can be a concern in downwind areas, especially metropolitan ones.
And wanting to make the point that this research wasn't to show the good or bad, just trying to collect more information on it?
Correct. We leverage emission factors on ksfire.org as part of our smoke tool for prescribed fire managers and land practitioners. And so right now it uses very generic, grassland emission factors. So it was important we do this research and are able to give them something a little more specific and realistic for what we actually see in the Flint Hills compared to a grassland throughout the nation. So.
What were some of those differences that you saw?
So thankfully, everything came up kind of within the realm of the generic factor, which is important. I think if we came up with something that was vastly different, it would have been somewhat in question. But we were able to find out for particulate matter, our grassland is probably on the lower half compared to the national one. Things like carbon dioxide were right in the middle. Methane, we were actually probably on the higher side compared to the national average. And then elsewhere, nitrogen oxide was another one. We're actually in the lower part of that one. So it's kind of in between, some on the lower, some in the middle, some on the higher end compared to that. But then in the grand scheme of things, they're definitely more realistic and a much smaller range compared to that national average.
Depending on how people burn, does that make a difference on some of the results you saw?
It can. We looked at the research and did break it into head fire versus backfire, as well as some smoldering. So dependent upon what method you use, it can result in a little bit different emission factors, and not even just emission factors, but even by pollutant. So, for example, smoldering is one thing that, limiting smoldering is important to limiting the amount of smoke that's produced because, those things that smolder typically produce smoke over a much longer period, and it can result in more emissions. Same thing with a head fire. That usually goes through relatively quickly. We burn off everything in a hurry. There's usually less pollutants that come out with a head fire compared to a backing fire. But again, then a lot of that goes into what you're burning, moisture content of what you're burning. So there's lots of variables. And I think, our research was just the beginning stages of what could be several other reiterations of that research that look into, different vegetation types, different methods of burning, as well as looking at other factors into burning. One thing that we actually looked at with our research was, the cow patties out in the field and how they smolder and, what's the emissions that actually come off of those, just as kind of a general, hey, what really is a part of that and so on. So maybe future projects for grad students at K-State or elsewhere to look at some of those things as well.
So what are you really hoping that other people take from this research?
I think we're looking at improving the tools that we use here in the state for prescribed burning, helping out, national folks when they look at what are the emissions that come from, burning within the Flint Hills. There's lots of tools out there that are used that kind of quantify the emissions that come from prescribed burning, and this will kind of only go to improve, what we see and what we have for Kansas specifically compared to that, the generic national numbers that were used prior.
If people would like to find more information or read this research, where can they do that?
So this research, as well as a lot of other research as far as prescribed fire, can typically be found on ksfire.org. So that's our Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan website. So that'll go into, again, this research, other research that's done on prescribed fire or even grazing in the Flint Hills can all be found there. You can also find our smoke model tool that's used quite a bit for land practitioners to kind of give them a heads up as far as what's occurring and if it's a good day or bad day to burn as far as air quality and dispersion of smoke is concerned. So that's a good place to find this and more info on there. So.
That was Data and Sustainability Section Chief with the Kansas Bureau of Air, Jayson Prentice. I will link his study titled Measuring Smoke Emissions from Prescribed Rangeland Burning in the Flint Hills region using Unmanned Aircraft Systems in today's show notes on agtoday.net. I will also link ksfire.org if you'd like to find out more information from them. Before we cut to a break, we are now going to be joined by Rod Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey as they discuss how the U.S. winter of 2023 and 2024 is now the warmest winter season on record.
The warmest winter in the United States on record?
Winter rankings, the United States, specifically the lower 48 states, coming in with its warmest winter on record. These records go back 130 years, all the way to 1895.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says those National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration average temperature numbers for this winter continue a recent trend.
If you look at those 130 years, now all 13 of the warmest winters have occurred since 1990, just in the last 35 years.
Rippey adds the gap between the top two all-time winter average high temperatures are not close from a climate perspective.
The winter U.S. average temperature of 37.6 degrees Fahrenheit was almost 5.4 degrees above what the average was during the 20th century, and that broke the previous record, which had been set in 2015-16, by more than 0.8 of a degree. In the realm of climate, not even close to the previous record. And number 3, now dropping to the list, 1999-2000.
The above normal warmth this winter occurred
despite a very sharp cold outbreak that occurred for about 10 days in the middle of February. But other than that 10 days, the other 90-plus days of winter, it was extremely warm, especially across the northern and the central United States.
With December 2023 reaching an all-time average record high temperature for that month, and despite the cold outbreak, February 2024 coming in as the third warmest February on record. The state-by-state breakdown further reflects just how warm on average the winter of 2023-24 has been.
It was the warmest winter on record for 8 individual states, and that included Iowa plus 7 Canadian border states extending from North Dakota to Vermont. We also saw impressively top 10 winter rankings in almost all other U.S. states. The only exceptions were New Mexico, Arizona, and Washington in the west, and then a handful of southeastern states extending from Arkansas and Louisiana eastward to the Atlantic coast, to the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida. So other than that little block of states in the southeast and New Mexico, Arizona, Washington, it was one of the 10 warmest winters on record.
A further example of the magnitude of the above normal high temperatures this winter.
The coolest state was Alabama, and even there, it was the 43rd warmest winter on record, which puts it in the top 1/3 of the all-time rankings.
I'm Ron Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we finish up our Monday show discussing an upcoming conference. And then to talk about it, we're joined by the director of the Center for Risk Management, Joe Parcell. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby, for having me.
Joe, this upcoming conference is the Agricultural Commodity Futures Conference, or sometimes also referred to as AgCon. And can you tell us a little bit about what is this conference?
We're excited to bring this conference back, and we're excited to again have it in Kansas City. This is a pretty special conference because it gives a chance for K-State to join partners with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission to really, pull back and look at what's going on in the markets from a really regulatory standpoint with all the changes. And there's probably a lot of folks out there that either, maybe they haven't attended this conference in the past or don't know what we call the CFTC, Commodity Futures Trading Commission, is. That's really the regulatory body over, a lot of the derivatives, or what we think of as the futures and options markets, but also sometimes the cash markets. And we're there to kind of peel it back again and look at what's going on with the trends.
Joe, what will be some of the different topics at AgCon?
So there's a lot of things going on out there, either directly or indirectly, that's impacting the whole supply chain, whether that's geopolitical, technological, information and how that comes about, and really then on the regulatory side. And what a lot of our topics deal with is what's emerging and what's coming up and how we can, step back and look and see what the regulators are doing, what the exchanges are doing, or what end users do to reflect on that. So some of our key topics deal with different capital and financial regulations coming down and how that's going to impact the markets, what's going on with our availability of information, what we're looking at on the emergence of voluntary carbon markets. We're going to be peeling back and looking at what's going on in the livestock markets. We're also going to be, this is new, we're going to be talking about, again, what's going on in the cash markets and how the regulators can, regulate the cash markets as well and look at if there's any fraudulent activity there, because they ultimately influence what's going on in the derivatives market.
Joe, you mentioned some of the different topics that will be taking place, but who will be speaking on those topics?
We're excited because it's not very often you're going to get the commissioner of the CFTC and all four of the commissioners there at one time, and they're all going to be there for the program. In addition, we have guest speakers coming in that represent Ambassador McCullock, who's chief ag negotiator for the U.S., going to talk about trade and geopolitical risk. We've got Senator Robert Marshall, who's going to give some opening comments. He's critical in terms of our ag policy that goes on. And then we're going to close. We got our luncheon speaker on Friday is the new president of the Kansas City Federal Reserve, Jeffrey Schmidt, who's going to address the group.
Who do you recommend take the time to attend this event?
I would say anyone that has a strong interest in making sure there's continued transparency and ability for these markets to transfer our risk and set prices in there. And that could be anything from, that's the farmers, that's agribusiness, that's lenders. This is really their chance to get a peek at what's going on now and in the future.
And Joe, what makes you excited to attend and put the effort into putting this event together?
This is really the one time really every few years that we have this conference. It gives a chance for folks to voice their opinion and hear from the regulatory side of what's going on. Because there is a lot going on the regulation side of these markets, and it's really important in terms of whether that's setting position limits, again, the cash markets, capital rules, registration rules, and just a general oversight. And this is a chance for folks to voice and hear what's going on and give their opinion.
When and where is AgCon taking place?
It's going to be April 11th and 12th at the Sheraton in Overland Park. We start at noon on Thursday, and we go till about the middle of the afternoon on Friday.
What does registration look like for people who would like to attend?
So we have early registration open until April 1st. The conference registration fee is $500. We have a room block set there at the hotel that's open until April 1st. Pretty reasonable rate. I think we're at $129. And those that want to register can go to kstate.edu risk management. You'll see it there on our website.
Is there a rate for students who would like to attend?
Yeah, we do have. We have an academic rate and a government rate that's at $225.
That was Director of the Center for Risk Management, Joe Parcell. I will put links in today's show notes on agtoday.net if you'd like to learn more information about AgCon. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.